So I recently took one of those at-home DNA ancestry tests. All I had to do was fill up a vial with a disgusting amount of spit and mail it off for analysis. We're gonna be here for a very long time. I just spit it back up in my nose. A couple weeks later, this is what I got. It's a neat little pie chart with these specific percentages that were color matched to different regions on a world map. The report told me I was mostly Southwest Asian, no surprises there considering both my parents are from Iran. That percentage, 86.7, I understood that to be the portion of my DNA that's West Asian. But it turns out that's not exactly what ancestry tests are telling us at all. Alright, so what are ancestry tests really telling us? Can you help me understand what my results are telling me? Because I'm getting mixed messages from ads and how other people talk about the results. This is Wendy Roth.
I'm an associate professor of sociology at the University of British Columbia. Okay, first of all, these test results are not about your entire DNA. They're about a tiny, tiny fraction of your DNA.
To understand how genetic ancestry tests work, let's start with the DNA itself. There are about 3 billion base pairs in our genetic code. Those are the A's, C's, T's, and G's that form the instructions that make us, us. Of these 3 billion base pairs, 99.9% are exactly the same in all humans. But for the remaining 0.1%, one person might have an adenine where another person has a guanine. These single letter differences are called single nucleotide polymorphisms, or SNPs. Groups of SNPs can help explain why some people are taller than others, or why some people have green eyes while others have brown eyes. But most SNPs have no known effect at all. What many DNA tests are looking at are a relatively small number of SNPs, specific positions in this 0.1% in our DNA, in order to give you your results. When a testing company receives your sample, they compare your pattern of SNPs to different reference populations in their database. These reference populations contain SNPs known to exist more frequently in different modern populations in the world. Then the testing company will give you a percentage that represents how strongly your pattern of SNPs resembles that group. But this process has a bunch of important limitations, and this is where things get complicated.
Lots of markers are found in multiple populations around the world.
First, even trying to classify humans into groups in the first place is tricky. Human genetic diversity isn't organized neatly into groups like countries or continents. Take a look at the distribution of this SNP that affects how a person absorbs folic acid. It's commonly found in Mexico, but also in Chile or even China just as often.
So let's say that a particular marker is found in the South Asian population 30% of the time. There's still a possibility that when you inherited this marker, you got it not from somebody who was South Asian, but from somebody who was in some completely different group that also happened to have that marker.
Second, testing companies put together their reference populations based on academic research and other people that have taken genetic ancestry tests. And most testing companies aren't clear about how many people are represented in their reference populations. So each company might have different reference databases, which helps explain why you might get different results from different companies. So what does this all mean for my results?
This is a probability with a margin of error. So it's not that you overall are 85% West Asian, but that the particular spots that they happen to look at, 85% of those locations are associated with Western Asia in their reference population.
So what about these other results? Am I really 2% African?
You've got a lot of, sort of small trace percentages here. Percentages that small are really not meaningful. Again, because that could be affected by having one person in the database. And if that one person gets reclassified later on because they get, a larger sample, that percentage will disappear.
Ultimately, DNA ancestry tests are really just giving us a probability, the testing company's best guess, and that uncertainty isn't made very clear in the results. Buried in my results, I found this confidence slider. It turns out my results were presented at about 50% confidence by default. When I increased that to 90%, my results got much more vague. All of a sudden, I was broadly West Asian, and a lot of my genetic markers were unassigned. So DNA ancestry tests don't actually tell us where our ancestors lived. They're really just giving us probabilities of where we're likely to have relatives today. But so what if people misinterpret their results? Well, that has consequences. They can make us believe that our ethnicities have these bright line distinctions between them, like in a pie chart.
When people are presented with test results and these percentage breakdowns, and they're led to think that these tests can tell you your race, or they can tell you who you are, that leads to a way of thinking. It makes us feel that there are very stark and clear biological differences between races.
One study found that DNA ancestry tests reinvigorate age-old beliefs in essential racial differences, that our socially constructed racial categories like white or black are essentially different from each other. Some groups have even turned to genetic ancestry tests to try and prove their racial purity. DNA ancestry tests can be useful. Search YouTube and you'll find hundreds of stories of people using them to find lost relatives and to fill in their family histories.
I just found my biological dad's family.
And to people who don't know a lot about their ancestry, the tests offer the best available estimate.
So I really don't know that much about my genetic history.
But it's important to remember that despite their marketing, these tests are just a company's best guess at matching your genetic markers to different parts of the world. What they're not going to tell you is whether you should wear a kilt or not. DNA ancestry tests might not be as informative as you want them to be, but more and more people are still taking them, and this giant database of genetic information is becoming super valuable to an unexpected group, law enforcement. We teamed up with Verge Science to look into how your privacy is at risk because of these DNA ancestry tests, even if you've never taken one.
Questions tonight about how Ancestry.com is sharing DNA information and how much customers should know. Our Julie Watts has more on Ancestry's partnership with Google.
Is Bryce your assistant? No, of course not. He's my transfusion associate.
It was spoofed on HBO's Silicon Valley.
Regular transfusions of the blood of a younger, physically fit donor can significantly retard the aging process.
But real-life tech billionaires are researching ways to live longer. Take Bay Area-based Calico, short for California Life Company, which researches therapies aimed at extending the human life. Not with blood transfusions, but by using Ancestry's DNA database. According to a recent McClatchy News Service investigation, Ancestry can identify families with long lifespans, enabling Calico to pinpoint genes that might contribute to a longer life. It's not a new partnership, but it is raising new privacy concerns because Calico is a subsidiary of Alphabet, which also owns Google.
I'm very worried about the type of information monopoly that Google has. Now I'm getting very worried about how that extends to a record of our genetic predispositions.
Consumer watchdog's Jamie Court calls the relationship between Ancestry and the Google subsidiary frightening, noting that Google already has more information about us than anyone else in the world.
And you have a recipe for genetic mining, putting together pieces of information about people's DNA attributes and comparing that to their behavior in the real world, what they search for online. The Pandora's box this opens is tremendous.
Now, Ancestry insists the aggregate data they give Calico is de-identified. There's no name or identifying information, and it's only from users who opt in to sharing their data for research. Ancestry does disclose its partnership with Calico. Users can scroll down to the bottom of the Ancestry privacy policy, and under Research Partners, click to view a list here. There, alongside more traditional researchers, there is one line with the name Calico Life Sciences LLC and a link to a 2015 press release. Though notably, there is no reference to Calico's parent company.
I don't think people would submit if it said that we're sharing this information with Google, which is the largest information brokerage in the world.
Julie Watts, KPIX 5.
Now, we did speak to Google and to Calico, and they stress that they are two separate companies. They say that Google does not have access to the ancestry data from Calico, and we should also note that Google was an early investor in 23andMe.
Consumer DNA testing kits are becoming increasingly popular. It's a good way to find out more about your genetic makeup, family history, and health risk. But at what cost? There are concerns that these companies could be misusing your private DNA data. Suspicions really kicked off when Senator Chuck Schumer condemned DNA testing companies at a news conference, stating, "Here's what many consumers don't realize, that their sensitive information can end up in the hands of unknown third-party companies. There are no prohibitions, and many companies say that they can still sell your information to other companies."
The thing I think that's important to realize is that there is only a single law that covers the sale or use of our genetic data today, and that's GINA, the Genetic Non-Discrimination Act. And that covers the use of data by employers and insurance companies. It's definitely an area I would be concerned about because as of today, there's no restrictions on that type of use.
More than 80% of consumers at major DNA testing companies consent to having their DNA shared for research, mainly because they believe they're helping overall research.
We do work with collaborators on those genomes which are consented for research and research only, and for those who are de-identified and accessed in aggregate.
So should consumers be concerned?
I would be concerned in the future what could happen. While I don't think many of these companies are doing that today, actually I don't think any of them are doing it today, the thing to keep in mind is that there's nothing preventing them from doing so.
It's important to consider the possible use or misuse of your data. Not even necessarily by the companies themselves, but also things like breaches and hacks.
In weighing whether or not you should do this, you really need to think carefully whether it's something that can really benefit you and it's about your health, or is it just, for fun? We don't necessarily know all the ways in which this data could be used.